Different natural disasters have occurred at different times, but the severe and long-lasting impacts of some of them have cemented their place in history. Unfortunately, natural disasters will continue to be a problem. They will keep happening, and usually, there isn't much warning beforehand. Even if you are given forewarning, you have no idea how massive it can become. You should always assume the worst and make preparations for the worst case scenario. After all, you'll find that most victims of these catastrophes never imagined it might happen to them. Number 10. Haiti earthquake. On January the 12th, 2010, a catastrophic 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck 16 miles west of Haiti's capital city of Port-au-Prince. The quake was felt by nearly 3 million people and set off 52 aftershocks for 2 weeks after the first massive one. Poor housing conditions, lack of preparation, and a lack of earthquake retrofitting proved catastrophic for the small island nation, destroying more than 250,000 homes. Death tolls are difficult to estimate and have been a matter of dispute for years. The Haitian government claims that about 222,000 people were killed. However, several investigations by foreign organisations have charged the Haitian government with artificially inflating numbers to receive greater humanitarian aid. Still, the structural damage was enough for the nation, and recovery from the earthquake was problematic for several years, as nearly all of the country's communication systems, transport facilities, hospitals, and infrastructure were severely damaged by the quake. Despite a rapid humanitarian response from the international community, poor coordination amongst rescue crews only added to the volatile situation, as medical supplies, food, and water rarely reached the worst hit areas of Haiti, where $8 billion in property damage was done. Number 9. Indian Ocean earthquake. On December the 26th, 2004, an undersea earthquake with a magnitude of 9.3 struck the Indian Ocean, just west of Sumatra's northern coastline. The megathrust earthquake is believed to have been caused by a rupture along the fault that lies between Burma and Indian tectonic plates. Due to its intensity, a series of tsunami waves reaching heights of 100 feet was sent hurtling towards the coastlines of Indonesia, India, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. The resulting tsunami took many regions by surprise, as waves travelling at approximately 310 to 620 miles per hour slammed local coastlines within hours, and in some areas, within minutes. Waves were seen as far away as Struis Bay, South Africa, nearly 5,300 miles from the earthquake's epicenter. In total, 227,898 people were killed by the large waves, with Indonesia experiencing the largest number of casualties. It could have been more if it wasn't for the humanitarian relief from the international community. They provided financial resources along with freshwater, food, and sanitation facilities, which helped contain diseases, starvation, and dehydration. In total, the international community contributed nearly $14 billion to the 18 nations affected by the disaster. Number 8. Haiyan earthquake. On December the 16th, 1920, a catastrophic 7.8 magnitude earthquake occurred in Haiyan country in Ningxia province of China, killing more than 270,000 people. After the earthquake aftershocks, many rivers were dammed from the sudden jarring motion of the quake, resulting in extreme flooding. Some 20,000 square kilometers were affected by the earthquake and the following floods. Despite the tremendous death toll, many researchers believe that the event could have been far worse if not for the fact that the quake occurred in a predominantly rural area away from many of China's major cities. Although the 1920 Haiyan earthquake is considered one of the worst natural disasters in human history, it is also one of the most ignored tragedies of the 20th century due to the political and social issues in China. The quake was largely overshadowed by a drought famine during the same time that affected nearly 20 to 30 million people in northern China. As a result, humanitarian efforts for the disaster's victims were relatively small, with most funds and aid sent to famine victims instead. To make matters worse, much of the foreign relief provided to China during this time was pocketed by the corrupt Beiyang government. Number 7. Tangshan earthquake. On July the 28th, 1976, a catastrophic earthquake struck Tangshan in China at 3:42 in the morning. The 7.6 magnitude quake took the city by surprise, as nearly 85% of the city's buildings were destroyed in minutes. At least 255,000 people died in the disaster, with several 100,000 others seriously wounded. Nearly all of the city's services failed that day, along with most of the area's infrastructure, including railways, highways, and bridges. That is why there were so many casualties. The Tangshan earthquake was particularly bad and unique in that the quake involved two separate shocks. In the morning, with the other happening later that afternoon. Nothing like this was ever seen. 12 further aftershocks with magnitudes of 6 or larger occurred following the initial one, destroying many of China's coal mines in the region and damaging infrastructure as far away as Beijing. Despite failing to predict the earthquake in advance, the Chinese government showed to be quite competent in managing the catastrophe, dispatching emergency units and relief within hours in a methodical and planned way. The quick reaction was critical in preventing future deaths, since the establishment of sanitary facilities and the supply of food and water helped to significantly lessen the effect of illness and starvation. Number 6. Antioch earthquake. In May of 526 AD, a massive earthquake hit Syria during the mid-morning hours, claiming at least 250,000 lives. Scientists believe that the earthquake was likely a 7-magnitude quake and caused severe damage to the city's buildings and infrastructure, including Constantine's Domus Aurea Church. The most devastating aspect of the quake, however, lies with the large-scale fire that erupted during its aftermath. Lasting nearly a week, the fire destroyed nearly all of Antioch's buildings and claimed countless lives. Death tolls vary significantly due to the lack of documentation available from this period. Scholars believe that between 250,000 and 300,000 people lost their lives. Number 5. Coringa cyclone. On November the 25th, 1839, a massive cyclone struck Coringa, India, a harbour city in Andhra Pradesh. It produced a 40-foot high storm surge that devastated the city. The storm left 300,000 people dead and destroyed over 25,000 ships, making it one of the deadliest storms in human history. Located on the Bay of Bengal, Coringa was once a busy port city, serving as a crucial source of trade between India and the world. Although Coringa had massive cyclones in the past, including the Great Coringa Cyclone of 1789, which killed over 20,000 people, the city always rebounded from these natural disasters with ease, becoming both prosperous and heavily populated by the mid-1800s. But not this time. The devastation the cyclone brought with itself completely destroyed the city landscape. Although little is known about the storm due to a lack of sufficient records, scholars believe that the city's inhabitants were taken completely by surprise, because the storm happened unusually late in the Bay of Bengal's cyclone season. And following its devastating 40-foot storm surge, very few survived to tell about the disaster. Wreckage from the city's vast number of ships was found miles inland, while Coringa itself was wiped off the map. Coringa never recovered from the cyclone, as the city's survivors did not attempt to rebuild in the years and decades that followed. To this day, Coringa remains a small village area, a mere shadow of its former glory. Number 4. Bhola cyclone. On November the 12th, 1970, a powerful cyclone made landfall along the coast of East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, inflicting massive damage on the poorly prepared region. Reaching winds of 115 miles per hour, the storm delivered a 33-foot high storm surge that devastated local communities. More than 3.6 million people were directly impacted by the storm, with nearly 85% of all homes and buildings destroyed or severely damaged along the coast. The powerful cyclone is believed to have killed nearly 500,000 people, including 46,000 fishermen, and crippled the area's fishing capabilities for several years, as 9,000 boats were also destroyed. Although international aid was swift, the Pakistani government was slow to respond to the crisis, making conditions on the ground very difficult for the region's survivors in the days and weeks. Rather than opening its borders to foreign relief efforts, the Pakistani government purposely delayed many supply drops and convoys loaded with medical supplies, food, and water due to political indifference to the crisis. The government's mishandling of the disaster eventually led to a split within East Pakistan that eventually developed into the Bangladesh Liberation War only a few months later. Number 3. Shanxi earthquake. On the morning of January the 23rd, 1556, China's Ming dynasty witnessed one of the most powerful earthquakes in human history around its Shaanxi province. The 8.0 magnitude quake affected 97 different counties in China. With many of Shaanxi's population living in artificial caves built into cliffs, the Yaodongs, the quake was particularly devastating as many of these caves simply collapsed, killing thousands in their homes. In many areas, imperial records from the time indicate that over 60% of the region's population was killed by the quake. In total, official records indicate that over 830,000 Chinese people lost their lives in the disaster, as countless landslides, flooding, and aftershocks that lasted for half a year wreaked havoc on the area. Places as far as 310 miles from the quake's epicenter also experienced death and destruction, with buildings in Beijing, Shanghai, and Chengdu suffering structural damage from the natural disaster. Although the 1556 Shaanxi earthquake may have had an overall magnitude smaller than more modern quakes, the widespread death and destruction it inflicted are second to none, making this event one of the worst natural disasters in history. Number 2. Yellow River Flood. In September of 1887, torrential rains resulted in one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, as China's Yellow River escaped its banks and flooded 50,000 square miles of northern China. The cause of the disaster were the farmers living near the river, who over many centuries built barriers to prevent the Yellow River from naturally flooding each year. With centuries of silt depositing itself along the bottom of the river due to its inability to flood outward, water levels naturally rose as a result, swelling the Yellow River to unprecedented heights. As heavy rain set in for several days in September 1887, barriers near the city of Chengdu could no longer hold the water at bay, allowing the river to flow uncontrollably throughout the low-lying plains that surrounded it. As more barriers broke, entire regions were engulfed with floodwater within moments. As the water finally receded weeks later, nearly 2 million Chinese were left homeless, while more than 900,000 were killed by the devastating flood. Lack of preparation combined with poor government response only exacerbated the volatile situation on the ground, as basic necessities like food and water remained scarce commodities for weeks. Sadly, the next and last one is also from China. Number 1. China Central Flood. In 1931, China experienced the worst natural disaster in human history, as floods from the Yellow Yangtze, Pearl, and Huai rivers, combined with flooding from the Grand Canal, drowned much of central China. The disaster was the result of many factors. Melting ice and snow from China's mountains, combined with heavy rains throughout the spring, summer, and autumn, forced each of China's major rivers outside of their banks, resulting in a flood zone that covered an area of 180,000 square kilometres, equal to the size of England and half of Scotland combined. 53 million people were affected by the flooding, with a death toll of 3.7 million people. Apart from the tremendous human toll, the Great Flood was also responsible for destroying farmland and houses, resulting in famine the following year. Although international relief was quick, the invasion of Manchuria by the Japanese in late 1931 only added to the turmoil. As of 2019, the Central China Flood of 1931 remains the world's worst and deadliest natural disaster in history, with damage costs impossible to be calculated due to the tremendous destruction involved. If the destruction brought by the reported disasters was this much worse, the undocumented ones must have been far worse. Perhaps we'll never know.